Good morning, children. It's Mr. Bruce again, here for another week of reading stories in the morning. I want to say I'm proud of all of you. You're doing a great job washing your hands. Keep that up. And when we get back to school, you're going to do the same thing. Today's book is Another Curious George, my favorite monkey. Before we start, let's get our eyes watching, ears listening, voices quiet, body calm. Let me get some glasses on so that we can see what I'm looking at. Oh, there you are. Hello. This is George. He has lived with his good friend, the man with the yellow hat, for many years. He was a good little monkey and always very, very curious. Today, the man in the yellow hat had a surprise for George. He was taking him to the beach. Well, he found a spot on the warm sand, and then another surprise. George saw his friend Betty. Look, Betty, her grandmother said, it's Curious George. But Betty did not even smile. She had never been in the ocean before, and she was scared. Well, I know you're a good swimmer, the man told her. You'll be fine once you get in the water. Feeling better, Betty walked towards the shore with her grandmother. George helped spread out the beach blanket and set aside their lunch. He was looking forward to a picnic, but it was not yet time to eat. It was time to play. George was having fun. He learned a new game, bouncing a beach ball. He dug into the sand and buried the man with the yellow hat. Oh! He made new friends. Monkeys, incidentally, are very good at making friends. He made friends with a crab there. When he took a break, George watched the lifeguard. The lifeguard sat in a special chair. Sometimes he blew a whistle. Hey, get out of that side of the shore. There may be tides out there. He was helping the people out there not to get in trouble while they're swimming. Sometimes the lifeguard looked through his binoculars. It looked like fun to be a lifeguard. George was curious if he could be a lifeguard maybe. Before long, the lifeguard took a break. Here was George's chance to try to be a lifeguard. Watching the crowd from up in the special chair, George felt just like a lifeguard. He looked through the binoculars. There was a lot to see on the beach that day. Look, there's some birds flying ahead. He sat up in the chair. He was like a big deal. He was in charge. Look at all the people playing in the water. They were having a great time throwing balls, skipping stones, swimming, playing with turtles. George saw seagulls flying high above, and he saw Betty on the shore. But still, she had not been in the water. Then the lifeguard saw George, and he said, Hey, get out of there. That's no place for a monkey. George thought it was a fine place for a monkey, but he did not want to cause trouble, so he climbed down. Back on the beach, George was hungry for a snack. No one would miss just one cracker, thought George, and he reached into the basket. He took one out and put it on a napkin. It looked very good. Now, if only he had a little cheese to go with that. Uh-oh, wait a second. What happened to his cracker? Well, he said, I'll just have to get a new one. George found another cracker. Then he turned back around again. But now his cheese was gone. Who keeps taking all his snacks? George was curious. He put down his cracker and he waited behind the basket. Waited and waited and waited to see who would come and try to steal his cracker. Now, George saw who was trying to steal his treats. It was a seagull, and he was hungry. He flew down and flew out. George took out another cracker, and the bird took it right out of his hand. George said, Hey, this is fun. I can feed this seagull. Well, George saw more birds down by the water, and Betty was there too. George was curious. Could those seagulls be hungry? Indeed, they were, and they were very hungry. Soon a whole flock had gathered. George could not feed them fast enough. Luckily, Betty was glad to help. Out of the basket came more crackers, cookies, a cake, and even the bread for the sandwiches. They were feeding the birds everything, and the birds were happy. Still, the birds were hungry. But when George reached for more snacks, the basket was gone. He and Betty were having so much fun, they did not notice the tide was coming in. That means the waves were getting closer and closer. They didn't notice the picnic basket was floating out to sea. Oh my gosh, the tide came in and took it away. George felt bad. He hadn't meant to lose the basket. Could there be a way to catch it? George thought and he thought and he thought, how can I get that basket? Then he remembered the lifeguard. George was no lifeguard, but to save the basket, he knew just what he had to do. Quickly, he found the float and carried it to the water. Jumping aboard, George began to paddle on the floating paddleboard. He paddled out into a little further down and a little further, and finally he reached the basket. Betty cheered. Then as George paddled back to the beach, Betty jumped in the water and swam out to meet him. She wasn't scared anymore. Everyone was glad to see George safe on shore. The lifeguard, who had been seeing everything from his chair, said, "Well, George, that was some rescue." The man with the yellow hat picked up the basket. He was curious. "George," he said, "is this our basket?" But poor George. After all that, the basket was empty. There would be no picnic on the beach, and it was all his fault. Then Betty's grandmother said, "Won't you join us for lunch? We have plenty. And look, now we have a reason to celebrate." Thanks to George, they did have a reason to celebrate. Betty was finally in the water, and she wasn't scared anymore. She was having fun. After everyone joined Betty and George for a swim, it was time to eat at last. There were sandwiches and chips and bananas and cookies and watermelon. There was plenty for everyone. And there was even a little for their guests. And you know who the guests were? The birds that came back down again. The end. Well, Curious George had a lot of fun at the beach, and there are lots of fun things you can do. You can play with the balls. You can build sandcastles like he's doing there. You can go swimming. You can sail on a paddleboard. When you go to the beach, what's your favorite thing to do? And pretty soon, we'll be able to go back to the beach again. So that's the question for today. What do you like to do at the beach? Okay? I'll be back tomorrow to see you. Be good. And like I said before, wash your hands. Bye-bye.